All right. Let's just give it a second. Yes, and we are live. Hey, everybody. Welcome to today's Gatsby Web Creators episode with Aisha and Marcy. This disembodied voice is Caitlin from the Developer Relations team. And without further ado, I'll hand it off to you, Aisha.
All right. Welcome back, everybody. Today we are going to be talking about CSS Animations and media queries. So I am really excited to get started. Marcy, do you have any favorite? I'm talking about animations in a broader sense. Do you have any favorite cartoons or anything?
I think we lost your screen, Aisha, but let's see. I mean, the ones that really come to mind, Adventure Time is probably my favorite, with the, spindly arms and fun universes with just weird animals. I like weird things. So yeah, I think my favorite would have to be Adventure Time.
I like that it came with an arm motion. It does look like we're having some technical difficulties. I see no audio available.
Okay, hang on.
Livestream.
Okay.
I'm not seeing. No one has said anything in chat about there not being any audio.
I'm looking at captions.
Oh, okay. All right, let me double check.
Not getting Aisha's audio, maybe.
Yeah, Aisha, can you talk a little bit?
Yeah, I can keep talking for as long as you need me to, Caitlin.
Okay. Let's hang on for just a second. Let me see if there's another, because I have your microphone in here, but it doesn't seem to be doing anything.
Oh.
I don't suppose there is anything muted on your end, is there?
I don't think so. I wonder if it's picking up one of my other mics.
Do you know which microphone you set it? Okay, so now it looks like you're talk again.
How about now? Can you hear me?
Yep. Okay. And send that to live. We're good to kick things off with some technical difficulties. And you're sharing the Livestream screen now, so whenever you're ready to share. There we go.
Here you go.
Get my face off of that screen. All right. Well, all right. Well, hopefully everything is in order now. So let's reset and go ahead.
All right, and we're back. Welcome everybody again to Gatsby Web Creators. So, Marcy, I really appreciate that your contribution to the animation conversation came accompanied with an arm motion.
I don't think we're getting audio, unfortunately.
Oh no.
Did she get my audio? That's a good question. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we'll make it work, I'm sure.
No, not getting any for either of us?
Okay.
Hey, chat room, if you can hear us, that would be a good test.
That would be helpful, yeah.
That'll be a good test to see if it's how.
Hang on just a second, Marcy. I have to
chat can hear us.
Huh.
So just the captioner.
Okay. In that case, I am not. Mary, can you check and make sure that, in the green room, nobody's audio is you can see the little speaker on each video feed, if those are on or if they're X'd out.
Coming on an adventure with us.
Yeah.
All right.
No, I'm not sure. It should look like a speaker, and it'll be on the Yeah, like the videos of each of the speakers. There's that, but no, it'll be underneath. Like if you are in the green room and
Which now everyone knows we have a green room back here.
yeah, we're using a
Getting
tool
a-
called Livestream Studio.
You're
Our
getting
little green
a
room
look
area.
behind the scenes.
Yeah. It shouldn't be the orange symbol. Okay. So if you toggle the sound button on Aisha's screen, does anything happen?
Anything? Anything?
I don't think she was getting my audio either.
Yeah. Well, if we... Nope. Okay. All right. Well, I'm not totally sure what we should do here. I think the last time something like this happened, we ended up having to run a Zoom meeting, but I know I had trouble earlier trying to do Zoom and this at the same time.
Yeah.
Can you, wait, Mary, can you go to the Twitch stream? It'll be twitch.tv/GatsbyJS and try listening there. It'll be a little bit behind the live audio, but
That's a good suggestion.
it'll be something.
Yeah. And I think
it'll be twitch.tv/GatsbyJS. That's GATSBYJS.
And there is a setting for us in Twitch that will let you reduce the delay across the board. I don't know if we already have that set.
I am unfamiliar with this, so you're welcome to do things to it if you want to try it.
I can take a look real quick. All
Yeah,
right.
and the quicker we can get going, the better.
Yep, for sure. All right. Well, I'll see if I can find it while Mary's getting set up. And
yeah, so for those just tuning in, we're having some fun challenges with our captioner specifically. So we have live captions every week, which is amazing. Making that standard so that people who can't hear what we're talking about can then follow along with captions. So that's what we are trying to get figured out. For some reason, is not going as smoothly as it has in the past weeks.
Yeah, and yep, Mary, you can close out of Livestream if the Twitch stream is working for you.
Yep.
All right. Well, if we have something that will work, even if it's a few seconds delayed, I think that's okay.
Yeah.
I'm having trouble even loading the settings, so I'm not going to mess with it.
Okay. Sounds good.
Fair enough.
If we are good to go, I can't actually see the stream, so if we're good to go,
I think we are good to go.
Sweet.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for your patience.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, we could start again.
So, one more time, welcome. We are working, we're continuing to work on the site that we've been working with throughout this series. So we're a very dog and cat and generally animal focused group. This is kind of where we're at as of the end of last week. So we talked about your HTML elements, so how to add content to your web pages, CSS or cascading style sheets, which is how you change the way that those elements look on the page. And then last week, we talked about layout. We talked about how to position those different elements on the page, particularly within a grid. And that's where you see our animal friends, our other animal friends on the page. And we can drop links to this project for you in the chat as well.
Yeah, we got
Awesome.
we got a question in the chat a little earlier about how what is Gatsby and how is it different than CSS? So this series is really building up the foundational building blocks of web development before you get to Gatsby. So things like HTML, CSS. Next week we're going to touch on JavaScript and the document object model. So this will kind of lead us down that pathway. But we're really filling in the gaps of information to learn how to build on the web at all. And CSS is an important part of styling your web pages, making them look pretty and fun and delightful and accessible. And Gatsby is a website generator tool that uses those components to compile web pages. And so in future streams, we'll get back to sort of the core Gatsby content, but we're building up to that in various ways. And so stay tuned with us in future streams to see how this all connects.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah. So we are going to get started. So we're going to continue on using this website to keep building in new concepts as we go along. And as I mentioned earlier in the stream, today we are talking about CSS Animations, as well as media queries. So we talked last week a little bit about how we can set our styles so that the page looks different, is laid out differently depending on the width of the screen. And last week, we accomplished that using CSS Grid. So if we go to our coolstyle.css file and look at the CSS towards the end of that file, we see under where we've selected the main element, our grid template columns property is set to this repeat. And then within that, we're automatically configuring the width of our columns. And this main element makes up the main content of our page. It's this whole, it's pretty much everything, just about, with the exception of our footer, which just lets the world know that Rainier has the copyright on this page. So that main element now is a grid, and its contents depend, the width of its contents depend on the width of the viewport, the screen. So as I widen this window, which contains our site, the number of columns increases. So when it's smaller, we have a single column, and all of our content is still there. It's there in the same order and everything. But as that screen gets wider, our columns increase in number, as our content has a little more room to spread. So that's really handy. That's really helpful. It makes it a little more seamless as you are moving between different devices. So maybe you're looking at this app on a big computer screen, or maybe you're looking at it on a cell phone. You should be able to access the content regardless of the size of that screen. And so that automatic column layout is helping us do that. We can also accomplish different styles based on screen width using something called media queries. So this is not the only thing that we might use media queries for, but it is one use. And our media queries are going to allow us to basically set a constraint to say, this is, in this scenario, I want my styles to be X. So in our case, that might be something like screen width, but we might, and we'll come back to this a little bit later, we might say something that would affect the animations that we're going to do. So it looks something like this. I have a condition, and then I write my styles inside of that condition. And I'm using this @media keyword to indicate that this is a media query. I'm going to comment this out for now. And again, I'm using Control/ to comment out. So this code is going to be ignored for right now.
And some of that was pseudocode, by the way.
Correct. Yes, pseudocode is really, really helpful for me, at least, in illustrating and also kind of planning out what I'm going to write. So in this case, I might say, because I know that my condition goes here for my media query, I might say something like, user doesn't want animation. And even if I don't know quite how to do that yet, I know that that's what goes in that spot. It's going to hang out at the end of my styles. And then I'm going to say, instead of styles, something like remove animation. And then I know, okay, that's the plan. That's where we're going. And I can add that in once I figure out what needs to go there. So let's get started actually adding some things to our styles here. Now, we also want to talk about something called pseudoclasses. Pseudoclasses are sort of like classes, which is where we get the name, but these are able to be applied sort of by default. They're there for you already. So for example, let's say we add some links to our other animal friends section here. So we've got our grids of carnivores and herbivores, but let's add perhaps a new section. I'm going to add an H3 heading, and I am going to say that that is organizations helping our animal friends. Cool. So in here, I'm going to add an unordered list. And that list is going to have list items. So it's funny, today is actually my younger sister's birthday. And she works for an organization called the Wildlife Society. So let's maybe add their page as a link here. So I'm going to say A for anchor, and that's our link tag. And then inside of our href, or hypertext reference property, that value is going to be set to the URL that we want to point to. So this is wildlife.org/donate. And then we want to close that tag. And then inside, we want the text that's going to show up on the page. Awesome. So now we have a link that we can use as a demonstration. So we've got the Wildlife Society here, and you can add as many links as you like. But if we go back over to our styles, we can add a pseudoclass that will affect that link. So we want to select the links. This is going to select all the links on our page if we use the element's name. And I'm going to say hover. And I'm going to add a comma. And then A:"focus. Now, the styles that I add into the curly braces here are going to take effect when a link is hovered over or when it is focused on. And we'll talk about what that means. So for right now, I'm going to increase the font weight of our links. So now, if I hover over this link, it is now bold. And the same thing happens if I tab onto that link. So you may be able to see the blue box around this link at this point. And that blue box is indicating that my link has focus. That means that I'm able to interact with that link. When you are browsing web pages, you should be able to access everything that you need to interact with on the page using only your keyboard. And that focus is the indicator that tells you you're currently able to interact with that element. Marcy, I don't know if you have anything to add. Yeah, absolutely. So we have this. New hover/focus state that we can use, and that's great. That is exciting. But there is definitely more that we can do. We can also add transitions or transformations to our elements. So let's go ahead and add a couple more interactive elements to our page. I'm going to add some buttons. Buttons are fun. These buttons are not actually going to do anything yet, but if you stay tuned next week when we start to talk about JavaScript, you will see some more. You'll see some more use for those buttons. So for right now, I'm going to use our button element, and I'm going to add a few things here. I'm going to give myself a button with an ID of scale. I'm essentially naming this button scale. And I'm going to do the same thing with a few different elements. Now, notice when I do this, when I copy this button over, I'm getting an error showing up in my code. And it says the ID value scale must be unique. So the reason that is happening is that I've used an ID which is supposed to be specific to a single element on the page. Now, if you know absolutely that this one single element is always going to have this specific styling, then that's fine. But often you'll want to err on the side of caution and be a little less specific. And so that's why, at least for me, you'll often see I use classes instead of IDs. So for right now, I'm gonna go ahead and call these scale, translate, rotate, and rumble. And I'm going to change the text inside of each of these buttons just so that we know what each of them are. Okay. So I'm going to come back over to our CSS, and we're going to start adding some transforms to our buttons. And what that means is that we are going to be able to change the positioning, the appearance of our elements using some built-in functions, which is exciting. So when we do this, I am going to add a selector for, let's start with our scale button. So I'm going to use its ID, scale, and I'm going to give that hover pseudo class that we used on our links. I'm also going to go ahead and give it a focus pseudo class. So now when our scale button gets hovered over or focused on, we're going to change its state. We're going to change the way that it looks. So we're going to use a CSS property called transform, and then we're going to use the scale function. So what scale does is it will scale your element up or down. So when I say scale and I add a 2 inside of these parentheses, I am going to double the size. I'm going to multiply the size of my element times 2. And so now if I come over to my page and I tab onto scale, now when it receives focus, it gets much bigger. I think I'm actually doubling the dimensions on that. And so it is a little more, it's what, quadruple the size. Is that right? Marcy can correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah. So, well, do an audio check. Can you hear me, people?
You should be going through now.
Okay, cool. Keeping us on our toes.
Yes.
Yeah. So scale. Nope. I got a yes, no. So, I'm like, which is it? Okay, so yeah, scale. I mean, scale of 1 would be the existing size, and then scale of 2 is a doubling, as far as I know. What was really cool is how it kept its position. So you've got 4 buttons in a row, and when you did scale on it, they all kept their same places because the transform is transforming it like within its actual space. And that you can use to your advantage in layouts, where traditional ways of, if you were animating width and height or something, it would move everything out of the way, unless you have some other positioning or something. Transform and scale is super powerful. You can do some really neat things.
Cool. You see me over here trying to cheat. I've got, we're going to comment this out for right now. But so I've added other selectors for our other buttons. So right now, we have our translate button and our rotate button, which now have styles applied, but they don't quite make sense yet. So if scale takes a multiplier, translate is going to be looking for how we want to translate our elements. So for example, if I say 20 pixels, so 20px, comma, 20px for 20 pixels, and I come back over to our page, and I give that translate button focus. Now my translate button has been translated 20 pixels down and 20 pixels to the right from its original position.
Yeah, I think if you think of it as translate X and Y, so you're translating the X position and the Y position, it's like on a coordinates on a map, sort of. So like starting at 0, 0 is its natural position, and then you're translating X or translating Y to move it kind of on the grid.
Exactly.
Grid of pixels.
The grid of pixels. And in a similar way, you can think of rotate as being on a graph as well, but you're rotating on the origin. So when I say that I want to rotate this other button by 180 degrees, that means I want it to flip upside down. If I come over here and let's see, have I done that correctly? So now it does not yet appear that anything is happening to my button, but that is okay because it will. Let's see, actually, that will work for us. So it still doesn't like that, but that's okay. We are gonna get that working. And so the last one is Rumble, which is a secret for now. We're gonna work on that in a minute. So this is great. What we have right now mostly works. When I tab onto my link, it becomes bold. When I tab onto my scale button, that becomes bold, or that becomes much bigger. Translate, receives focus. It will translate on that graph or grid that we talked about.
I think I know what happened, by the way.
Oh.
So a little gotcha in CSS is that selector like strings for IDs or classes are case sensitive, and they have a capital starting letter in your HTML. So your selector might not actually be matching because of the case sensitive
Look at that
ID. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Let's
see if that works.
Yeah, looking good. Looking good. Definitely. And I went ahead and changed Rumble, which had the same issue. Thank you. All right. So this is great. But you'll notice we go straight to that state. There's not really an in-between. There's not really an animation. We're just flipping back and forth between two different starting and an end state. And that is totally fine, but not necessarily always what we want to do. So we can add another rule which will take care of our buttons. And in order to move more smoothly between those two states, we can add this transform property. This transition property. And that transition property is looking for the property that we want to transition, which in our case is transform, and also the duration, so the amount of time that we want that transition to take. So I'm going to say transform here, and I'm going to give it a number of seconds. So that could be 1 second. And now when I give these buttons focus, we see a more gradual transition to those different states. And you can fiddle with this kind of as you like. So I can make it take 5 seconds, and when I tab, that button will scale really slowly over 5 seconds. There are other ways that you can play with this too. So notice the same thing happens in reverse now. When I remove focus from this button, it scales back down really slowly. You can control the rate at which that happens using functions. And there is another word that goes in there, Marcy, if you want to help me out. I want to call them easing functions, but that is not correct.
There are easing functions. So if you make it go linearly, or they're actually mathematical functions. If you're
That's what I'm going for. Thank you.
So the easing is really cool. And if you kind of get deeper into animation, you can explore those. I believe you can provide your own easing functions too, but some of the common ones are like linear, where it just has a constant rate of change in and out. There's ease in, where maybe it goes slower. Let's see, ease in is, I get them mixed up because there's ease in, ease out, and it's like it goes slower and then speeds up, or goes fast and then slows down. And so you can make some really neat effects with easing functions.
Yeah, and I think if we don't have this in the, okay. So if you go to the README for this project and you look at the resources under transitions and transforms from Thoughtbot, that link will actually take you to a really in-depth explanation of each of not only the transform functions, but also the different easing functions. You'll see examples of each of them there.
And we have a Jay Langsdorff. Jason Langsdorff has rated us with a party of 63.
Oh well, hello.
So welcome, friends. We're talking about CSS.
Yeah, welcome everybody. So real quick for those who joined, this is a series that Gatsby is running called Gatsby Web Creators, and we are kind of starting from the beginning, working on some foundations of web development. So starting from HTML, talking through some concepts in CSS, and then next week we are going to be introducing JavaScript for the first time. So welcome all of you. Thank you, Jason, for bringing the crew.
And Pot from Glitch has joined us too, which is really awesome. Super happy to have you all today.
So many web friends. I love it. All right. So at this point, we've got these fun transitions and fun transforms, and we have them happening over this transition period. I'm going to reduce that a little bit so that we're back down to 1 second. And then there is another, we've still got one more button that we haven't touched yet. And this is going to kind of combine a lot of the things that we've talked about already. So we've got this rumble button here that currently doesn't do anything, even if I hover over it, even if it gets focus. Our rumble button is going to be our illustration of CSS animation. So up to now, we've used a combination of transform and transition to get these very small changes to our buttons. So we're moving from a single start state to an end state over a certain amount of time, and that's it. We only have those two states, and there's not really an in-between that we can define unless we start to edge into the world of CSS animation. So I'm going to uncomment with my control slash. So now I have this rule for our rumble button. But instead of this scale, I am going to use this keyframes button. Keyframes rule. And over here, instead of scale, we are going to use, instead of transform, we're going to use animation.
Fancy.
So fancy. We're back. So this animation, I'm going to say it's going to take similar types of information. So I'm going to say that I want my animation to take half a second. But in this case, I can make it loop. So over here on our buttons, each of these transitions only happens once. Our button receives focus and it scales up or translates or whatever it's going to do a single time. And then when it loses focus, that is reversed. With our animations, we can continue to loop an animation over and over again. So I'm going to say that this animation is infinite. And then I'm going to name it rumble. So you might have several different animations going on a single page, and you can differentiate between them using a name. So I'm going to name this one rumble. And to define that animation, I'm going to use this keyframes keyword. So I'm going to say keyframes, and then the name of my animation is rumble. And now I'm going to define the keyframes for my animation. So that is looking at, for time, the different sort of checkpoints within our animation. So 0% is the very beginning of our animation. It is 0% of the way through the time it will take to complete that animation. And I'm going to use the same transform property that we have that we've used in the past. So I'm going to say transform and translate. And this is going to be, I'm going to pass in 0. So this is representing coming or staying to the original position of my element. In this case, our rumble button. And I'm going to repeat that throughout. I'm going to move my button a little bit at different key points within this animation. And Marcy, I can't tell if you were trying to say something.
Nope.
Okay.
All good.
Sweet. So I'm gonna cheat again, and I'm gonna copy and paste this a few times. So we're gonna do 20%, 40%, 60, 80, and 100. And all of these are going to use that same translate function that we used on our translate button. But instead of a single translation that is triggered when we hover or give focus to the button, we're going to move around all over the place.
And you can specify how many keyframes you want in here. These are percentages, but those percentages will kind of be averaged over the duration of your animation. But you could just do 0 and 100%. You could do 50 to do it halfway. You can really craft how you want your keyframes to like happen on the screen, just by specifying different arguments in here.
Yeah, absolutely. So what I'm doing here is just sort of wiggling our button around. So all of these positions are just slightly off of its original point. So thinking back to our X and Y axis, I'm moving 3 pixels over and 3 pixels up in this scenario. And so now, when our rotate button receives focus, or when our rumble button receives focus, it is going to animate.
That is so good.
And so our rumble button's rumbling.
I love that. I just love the phrase rumble button. So seeing it come alive is like awesome.
It brought me back to like thinking about the rumble of the Nintendo 64 controller.
Oh yeah.
That's what I was channeling here.
I love it.
So that's awesome. I love it. I'm highly entertained by it. However, not everybody is going to want something like a rumble button on their screen when they're trying to work, when they're trying to learn something, when they're trying to use your website or application. Not everybody can handle seeing kind of jumpy animations like that, and so we want to be sensitive to that. We want to make sure that we're taking care of all of our users, and to do that, one of the ways we can do that is by making sure that we respect their decisions when it comes to animation. So I'm going to bring it back to our media query down here. We can actually target that specific preference based on whether or not the user prefers reduced motion. And believe it or not, that variable, that keyword that we can target is called prefers reduced motion. So what this is going to do is look to see if the user who is visiting your site has specified that they don't want a lot of motion when they view a website. Or actually, this is a system-wide preference that you can set. And so I imagine that also holds true for something like Word or another desktop application as well.
Yeah, so it's something you would set on a Mac or on an iPhone. I think Windows has a version 2. And so once the user sets that for their operating system, any application can tap into that, like in this case, the web browser. And it is really important for creating safe animations that won't give people seizures or motion sickness. It can be really distracting if you have, a learning disability or something that lots of distractions just prevent you from completing a task. Allowing users to specify that in their operating system is amazing. And I love that we can talk about this in context of animation here.
Yeah, absolutely. So to do that, you might, depending on what the animation was, you might get very specific and actually reduce the motion in your animation if it was absolutely necessary to what you were doing. Because our rumble button is not strictly necessary, what we can do in here is set rumble, rumble's animation rather, to none. So I can completely remove the animation from that rumble button. It's not super necessary, and so we can get rid of it. Now, this will only take effect. This rule will only take effect if my condition is true. So if my user has said that they prefer reduced motion, my rule that I've set inside of my media query will take effect, and the animation will be removed from my rumble button. Now, if I now went and set my preferences on my computer to remove or to reduce motion, then this rumble button would no longer rumble. And that would look like this. I'm going to go ahead and copy my rule, my rumble rule over, just to show what that looks like. Now, if I come over here and, oh, just kidding. That is not working for me. And maybe Marcy can spot what I did incorrectly.
Rumble, trying to do animation none. Well,
you know what?
The order might matter. Or the fact that it's applied to hover and focus and not the entire element.
Yeah. I wonder if that's what it is. Let's try it.
I also did some quick searching. So on a Mac, the reduce motion setting is under your system preferences and accessibility. On Windows, it is under Control Panel, Ease of Access, make the computer easier to see, turn off all unnecessary animations when possible. And I mean, you can be very specific with how your interfaces change. Like, say these buttons, maybe they don't apply at all, and you could just do display none when that condition is true. So you can get crafty and sort of, is this even relevant anymore if the user doesn't want motion? And a lot of interfaces, there's trade-offs, and you just have to look at it with kind of a user's perspective of, is this going to be usable if I turn off animation?
Absolutely. And I believe, yeah, okay. So if you look at the end state of this project, I did in fact include the hover and focus pseudo classes when I tested this out. So remember to do that if you have set that equal, or if you have set that to trigger when there is hover or focus.
Exactly. And we had a comment in the chat from Sylvanestia who was saying that their boyfriend was saying specificity. So we've got some community feedback, people watching. That is exactly what is. So if you have CSS applied to a hover or a focus pseudo class like that, that is more specific than the element ID itself. So that is exactly what, you were right.
And that also gets back to what we talked about when we discussed IDs versus classes. Generally, it's a little bit easier for me to work if I set these as classes, because those classes are less specific than the IDs that I've used here. And so it will be easier for me to fiddle and override things if I use classes instead. And those would be, that would mean switching all of these hashtags to periods, and also changing those IDs to classes in my HTML.
Yeah, which if you want to reuse these, that might be the direction that you would go. Whereas if you had a single button that did a thing, an ID might be the correct choice. I think you have to decide, how portable does this class need to be? And the specificity I know some folks can be frustrated by CSS sometimes because they feel like they're battling specificity. So it takes some experimentation, and CSS is really powerful and worth learning for sure, especially because if you can provide sort of default styles that match a lot of cases, you can work with those, and then you can get more specific, in situations and use cases that only happen in some areas. So you have to think about, what's general, what should be applied everywhere, what's more limited to a certain feature or a certain page, and you can add more specificity in those cases.
Absolutely. All right. So if we have any questions in the chat, now is a great time. We are just about there. I do want to show one example of a CSS animation applied to a CSS illustration. And we'll talk a little bit more about that next week. But if I come over here to this CodePen, which I can also add in the chat. So this is one example of an animation that is actually, you might have seen animations like this in real life. So this is an example of like a loading screen, and we've got HTML here. So this is there we go. So this was originally written in Pug, which is a language that makes it a little faster for folks who know Pug to write HTML. You can see it's less code than what we now have here, which is a series of div elements with different classes, and those different classes are representing each part of the little cat that we've got here. And we've also got a number of animations applied to this little cat. So we've got each of these eyes moving in a circle, the mouse and its trailing tail moving in a circle, and the eyelids for the cat moving up and down. All of those sort of in concert. And so you can do these really interesting animations that repeat using those same techniques applied to specific elements, all kind of working as a single unit.
That is so cute. Oh my gosh. It's like you don't really want to get stuck on a loading screen, but I kind of do want to get stuck on a loading screen with this cat animation. And Caitlin with the Gatsby JS account had a great point that we wish we had a pug emoji right now.
Oh, so true. So true.
I also went and found the link to your CodePen and shared it in the chat. So CodePen it's another really neat platform for playing with web development. So you can use CSS and HTML and JavaScript. It's social. We almost used it for the stream. We decided to use Glitch instead, which you'll see in upcoming streams, kind of why we made that decision. But CodePen is really awesome. And you can also fork, or in glitch terms, remix. You can take an existing example like this cat loader and fork it and make your own version, which is really cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. I'm gonna swap back over to our HTML here. But if there are any lingering questions, if there's anything else we want to talk about in our last few minutes, we are here. But if not,
we got one question in the chat from Shamrocky11. Is there any loading lag with complex CSS animations, or is it pretty instantaneous?
With CSS animations, in my experience, they are faster than, for example, writing a lot of complicated JavaScript to do the same thing. I would actually like to hear your take on that, Marcy. I haven't done a ton.
I have done some CSS animations. I guess it depends on how complex we're talking about. I mean,
Yeah.
anything that has a lot of code and a lot of computation could slow down your computer. I wouldn't call it loading lag necessarily because your CSS is likely already loaded. It's using browser APIs, or that's Application Programming Interface, is what that stands for. So functions and things in the web browser that support CSS really well. There's a lot of hardware acceleration, which means that they work great on mobile devices. So, yeah, I wouldn't call it loading lag because the code is already downloaded and it's just available. Once you match a selector, it should just run. As opposed to JavaScript, which might be running through functions and computing things on the fly, like that can be a lot slower. So I'd say CSS Animation is really great for performance as long as you're kind of using it, I don't know, with moderation, safely.
Definitely.
We talked about kind of the safety aspect. Yeah, so there's a lot of benefits to using it. I mean, there's of course trade-offs too. Like if you're doing things in JavaScript, sometimes you can control things, based on user input. So we usually use CSS and JavaScript in concert with each other. And so let CSS do what it does best, let JavaScript do what it does best. And CSS is pretty darn great for animation.
Definitely.
We got one more question from Sylvanestia. Is there a list of animations you can use CSS for? Like translate, scale, rotate, anywhere I can find or see all the possible animations to code?
Yeah. So we have talked about the Mozilla Developer Network. They definitely have a page like that. I think we have a different one listed here. This is the Thoughtbot article. Oh, no, there is also a CSS animation reference on MDN linked in the resources for this project.
I will drop one more that I just found of the list of animatable CSS properties. I can spell
Sweet.
animatable while I'm talking. And that is really nice because there's some CSS properties that just won't transition, things like display. So going from display block to display none, there's no transition because it's on or off. So having a list of animatable properties can be really great. And then, the available functions, things like translate, scale, the Mozilla developer page linked in the chat that goes straight to animation will have a full array of all of the possibilities that you could use. And we had one more question. They meant, is there a level of complexity that should be avoided when creating something like a loading screen, which might not be showing for a while? I think you'd have to play with it and experiment. There's different ways of creating these animations, so you'd have to play with it. I mean, I would recommend CSS because of its hardware acceleration and power with the browser. Yeah, I haven't really experienced that much of an issue. As long as, I mean, where I have seen it slow down is really cutting edge browser APIs. Like, if something's really new and kind of experimental, maybe it only works in Chrome or something, you want to really test those and see, do they perform on mobile devices and all the places that your users would go.
For sure.
And we got one more comment about animating display. So you could use opacity animation. There is a little difference. So opacity is only changing like the visual. Display none hides it from everyone. So there's some accessibility implications there. But you can use things like visibility hidden. There's like I have a workshop on this kind of thing about the differences between display properties and how you can animate. So yeah, that's a really interesting direction that I wish we had more time for, but we can provide some more resources for sure.
Definitely. Awesome. Well, we are just about out of time. I want to thank everybody for coming and hanging out with us. If Jason is still around, thank you for the raid. That was awesome. And I will pass it back over to Caitlin.
Yeah, sure. Well, and also thank you, Mary, our captioner, for captioning us today. Thank you, everybody, for bearing with us through a few more technical difficulties than we'd typically like in a stream. Yeah, it's been great. And we'll be back next week, same time, here on Twitch at 1 p.m. Eastern. And Aisha, can you remind me what the topic is for next week?
Next week, we are getting an intro to JavaScript led by Marcy.
Yes, JavaScript and the DOM, or Document Object Model. So we'll see how JavaScript starts to apply to the HTML and CSS that we've written so far. And then future streams, we can talk, in more advanced directions, including Gatsby-specific content. So stay tuned to the stream.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks, everybody, and enjoy your weekend.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.